a dream.
It's one small step for man.
I am the greatest.
You want something, go get it. Period.
What's up, my fellow dreamers, doers, achievers? This is episode number 29 of the Dream Big & Co. podcast. And 3 words for you before we cue the pre-intro for you to keep stapled, ingrained, implanted in your head through this episode is patience, perspective, purpose. Bishoy Tadros, the guest for our episode, that's his mantra in life. His mission is to spread that and seep that through every part of your being. And one quick major announcement, extremely important for Bishoy himself. He has had his fair share of obstacles in life, and he has used that, equipped himself to take on all these different barriers and endeavors going forward. And some of those things he's accomplished in having that is becoming the #1 fundraiser for the New York City Marathon last year, giving all these different speeches, growing mentally, and most importantly, the thing to highlight, he is becoming a new author. He can officially put that label on his bio and stamp that on there, an author of his new book, Break Barriers, How Setbacks Can Dare You Rather Than Define You. The link is in our description, and one more detail, the ebook is available for pre-order on the link. The soft cover will be available for sale right before the launch party on September 18th in New York City. And proceeds from that launch party and book sales leading up to this year's marathon in New York City will be donated to his $100,000 campaign for Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So in saying that, we got a lot to talk about, a lot to cover. Let's cue the pre-intro. This is episode number 29 with Bishoy Tadros.
I was born in Egypt, and at the age of 3 years old, I was diagnosed with leukemia. I had this moment of, all right, there's no turning back anymore. From this point forward, there will be no obstacles that get in my way. In order to get anywhere from that point forward in my life, I really had to get lost in arenas that I was not very versed in. That's when I had the real moment. And the moment wasn't, oh my God, you just finished that half Ironman. It was, Bishoy, you've been holding on to this story of breaking barriers for the last 30 years. It's about time you did something about it.
So I guess just to start off, there was like a couple different phases in your life that you really had to sort of break that barrier. I love the term you have, breaking barriers. Super excited for your book coming out, which we'll talk about eventually. But what was that first barrier you sort of had to break, especially as a child? It's not easy what you went through, but if you really just want to give detail, context, and there's all the stuff to that, yeah.
No, that's probably the best question that you could ask. So, Break Barriers is the name of the book, and the reason for that is because I established this mantra as a child, going through what I went through. So, just some quick background for folks that have not or have not seen or heard about my story. I was born in Egypt. And at the age of 3 years old, I was diagnosed with leukemia. Now, besides the fact that I was an immigrant child who was moving to the States to get treatment because of leukemia, I also had an interesting family dynamic. I'm Coptic Orthodox, which is a Christian minority in Egypt, and my father is a priest. So my family dynamic is also much different than the regular dynamic. I mean, for those 90s kids out there, you know, it's very much a seventh heaven type household that I grew up in the sense that the phones are ringing off the hook, and not only did my parents have to deal with the issues within our own household, my father was very much carrying the weight of several people outside our household as well. So when I was 3 years old, they made the decision to move from Egypt to the States for me to get treatment, and I began my treatment in California in the City of Hope. And after a year, we were relocated to Long Island, where I finished my treatment in the North Shore Medical System. Now, between the ages of 3 and 13, I had been undergoing different bouts of treatment. And for me, where I built up this mantra and where the mantra really came from was the fact that I had to shuffle around a lot emotionally. It wasn't necessarily the treatment that was the barrier, because as a child, I didn't necessarily know all the details around my diagnosis. I didn't understand what cancer meant. I didn't understand what leukemia meant. I knew I had to see doctors. I knew I had to get treatment. I knew that at times it was going to be painful, especially those spinal taps where they inject you in your spine.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that feeling. But
that just sounds
wasn't
gruesome.
Necessarily the barrier or the obstacle that I focus on. I focus more on the emotional, the mental, and the social. So growing up as an immigrant child, not looking like everybody else because of cancer treatment and because of being an immigrant. And because when I went home, my father didn't have the job that a lot of the other fathers had in my class at the time. So I was coming from a different world from all sorts of aspects. And I needed to put that all together at a very young age. And I needed to understand why I was different, how I was different. And I needed to articulate that to 8 and 9-year-olds at the time. And that's extremely difficult because, as you know, we all know, 8 and 9-year-olds are not the most forgiving people. And if you look different, if you act different, if you sound different, they'll have something to say about it.
Yeah.
And so that's really where I guess struggled the most, but that's where I also learned the most. And by the time I got that clean bill of health, when I was 13 years old, I had a brain surgery at NYU Medical Center in the city, and I was given that clean bill of health. I had this moment of, all right, there's no turning back anymore. From this point forward, there will be no obstacles that get in my way. And I put it down, and I understood that I was going to have to stumble. And one of the things that I realized and acknowledged from the previous 13 years of living was that I'm not going to get the results that I want when I want them. And that's where I really learned to lean on patience, because as a child, going through what I went through, I had to fight every step of the way, whether it was for my health, whether it was for proving myself to my classmates, whether it was understanding why I couldn't perhaps run as fast as the other kids because of my treatment. I was like a normal kid. You know, I wanted to play basketball. I wanted to make the team that everybody else made. I wanted to play the sports. And I had the heart for it. My heart was in it. I was committed, but my body was just saying no. And no matter how much time and how much effort I put in, I was never as quick as the other guys out there. And I kind of looked at myself once I got that clean bill of health, and I said, all right, enough is enough. We have the rest of our life ahead of us. And that's kind of what laid down the foundation.
Yeah, that's just tremendous to give you that type of perspective at such a young age. I mean, with, like you said, all the different facets at play, with all the different things you went through with moving to the States and then just having to actually go through that. I mean, also to sort of pay homage to your parents, they had to have a lot of courage and faith in everything to do that as well. So I sort of praise them in a way. I admire what they went through as well.
Yeah, I mean, they laid the groundwork, unbeknownst to me at the time, when it came to getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. Look, they turned their back on everything that they knew. And the example that I give people is, imagine you were married and you're in your mid-20s, you're 25 years old, which is, my mom got married even younger than that. She got married at 22 or 23, but by the time I was diagnosed, she was probably closer to 25, 26. And all of a sudden, your world is shaken upside down. Your husband tells you that in order for your son to live, you know, you probably can't get treatment here, and you have to move all the way across the world, and you don't know if you're going to come back, and you don't know if your child is going to make it.
Yeah.
And so they took that first leap, and they set the bar for me, where maybe I didn't realize that at a young age, but certainly now reflecting it, when I tell people about how important it is to kind of exit your comfort zone and how important it is to put yourselves in a position that may not feel natural, you know, it all stems back to that first move that they made.
Yeah, I know. And one of the things you said, which I really, really loved in one of the videos I watched, was you said life is about swerving. It's about twists and turns. There's no straight path. And that's just true in so many ways, especially you with all the twists and turns you had. But one thing I want to mention, because I've really just been focusing so much on this topic lately, is sort of being in a place of the unknown and just being lost, being unsure, just especially with your parents, with what they went through. They were in the unknown for a while and they took a leap of faith. So can you just sort of, for all the like younger people who want to sort of jump the gun at times, can you talk to the fact of it's okay, it's actually crucial to be lost at times? Because I'm sure you were in that path, in that way, lost in life through all the experience you went through. Yeah.
Yeah, I talk about it in my book, in the fact that in order to get anywhere from that point forward in my life, I really had to get lost in arenas that I was not very versed in, if you will. Mm-hmm. So here I am getting a clean bill of health and entering high school. And all I want to do is really A, fit in, and B, prove to myself that I'm healthy enough to keep up with, everybody out there. And that was a whole new arena to me, because for my previous lifetime, I didn't fit in. I didn't really have that many friends in those younger years because I was just different. And then I got to high school, and I talk about how when I was in 10th grade, I went out on a limb and decided to host a party at my house while my parents were home.
Oh, big one. Okay, big one.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, little did I know that I was definitely exiting my comfort zone. It was my way of trying to make friends, but it completely backfired when 90 kids showed up in my basement, and things didn't really end well. And you could read about that in the book. But that was like the first attempt at trying to do something outside of my comfort zone, because I realized whatever I was doing wasn't working. And then on the playing field, I attended St. Anthony's High School out on Long Island, which is a big powerhouse, like Friday Night Light type of high school. And all I wanted to do was, I wanted to be a part of a team so bad, because I had been so used to that point, just getting cut time after time from different sports. Again, not because I didn't have the heart for it, and not because I wasn't skilled. I knew how to do a lot of things when it came to athletics. I was just slow because of the treatment. The treatment really slowed me down. And so I got cut from a football team that doesn't really cut people twice before I made it that third time. And by the time I made it that third time, I didn't even care to see the field. I just wanted to put on that jersey. But I realized again that I had to put myself in those uncomfortable positions, accept the fact that failure was likely in order to get to that next step. And that carried on forward with me to my career, where when I graduated, I was unemployed during the financial crisis. All I wanted to do was work in finance and banking, and everyone and anyone at that time was telling me I'd have to change gears, that I wasn't going to make it, that, the big banks of the world don't hire people coming from small state schools. Yeah. And again, I kind of had that moment of, okay, let me take a step back. I have to get tactical. And I navigated my way into JP Morgan. And so I realized once I made that asserment that I was going to not let anything get in my way, that things still take time, and it's all about being patient and realizing again, you don't get the results you want when you want.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And two things I want to bring up are, one, this sort of like the way life works. It's like you have different circumstances, but the toolkit you have going through them applies the same and even gets better throughout life. So you had this very unique, well-equipped toolkit to get through every different scenario and circumstance in your life as you grow as a person. And then definitely the next point, you actually led right into it, is when having that patience and going through something, it's crucial, like you talk about a lot, is focusing on the small things and celebrating the small wins. So what is your sort of goal setting equation in a way to achieve some type of thing? If you want to even talk to the example of JP Morgan, how you made your way up the ladder, because that would be a perfect correlation.
Yeah. So I do have I'm glad that you brought up the equation, because I do have an equation. That equation is patience plus purpose plus perspective. Those three added up are the formula to overcoming different obstacles. And I talk about that in my book. So patience, again, like I said, at a young age, realizing you don't get the results that you want when you want them. Perspective you need to come to a point where you start to accept that things happen for a reason. And that's something that I made peace with at a young age. And I realized that perhaps it was a blessing in disguise that I was dealt the cards that I had, as difficult as they were. Because without that struggle, I never would have learned the lessons that have carried me throughout life. And then purpose, constantly exiting your comfort zone, constantly doing things that perhaps you'd prefer to avoid, just to really tap into that potential. By taking a culmination of those three things, patience, perspective, and purpose, that is the secret formula. And that is what I talk about with regards to how you overcome different obstacles. And when it comes to career, when it comes to JP Morgan and how I navigated my way around the bank, and when it comes to even how I navigated from a bank now into a technology firm and moving across industries, it really came down to a few things. It came down to a couple of uncomfortable conversations, meaning that there's no reason to be intimidated by senior level folks in any organization, because at the end of the day, they breathe the same air that we breathe. And a lot of times, especially with younger folks, I see people buckling up when they're around someone who has either accomplished a lot in their career, or who has a fancy title, or who is recognized by others as being successful for one reason or another. But one of the things that I really honed in on was, at the end of the day, we all walk on the same earth and breathe the same air, where at times I shot out emails and sent out messages to folks way above my level, and it paid off throughout my career. And so that was the getting comfortable with the uncomfortable.
I love everything you're about, because this flows perfectly into the next thing, is the power of asking. And I've witnessed that in my short time of being on this earth. But you, with more experience, you've had to ask a bunch and, like you said, go outside your comfort zone. So did you sort of use your label as being at JP Morgan to utilize that when asking, or how did you ask when you did that, like getting really practical and pragmatic about it?
So I did a couple of things differently. My story when I came into JP Morgan was I originally had an accounting degree out of SUNY Geneseo, and I didn't want to be an accountant. I had no passion for accounting, but like I said, it was the financial crisis. And so in order for me to get tactical and land a job, because I needed a job at that point, first gig I took was a recruiting job that placed public accountants. After doing that for a year, I had networked with a bunch of CPA firms and eventually got myself in front of one that was looking for a junior accountant. And I said, hey, I have a guy, and essentially pitched myself. And once I started at that CPA firm, I started my MBA simultaneously. So I was doing my MBA, I was working busy seasons, I was like 23, and I was on a mission. I was 70 hours a week in the office.
That's the sacrifice.
Going to class at night. I basically didn't have a social life. I wasn't going out. I wasn't interacting much. And I was really keeping to myself. About a year into that, I was out for a buddy's birthday. And while I was out for a buddy's birthday, one of our mutual friends asked me about work. And I think it's when it finally came out. I think it was after a couple drinks. I couldn't hold back, and I basically unleashed. I was like, dude, I got to get out of here. I was like, this is not what I want to be doing. My life is a living hell right now. I don't see anybody. I'm doing a job I'm not passionate about. Yeah. And I've been fighting so long to break into banking, and it doesn't seem like anybody wants to take me. It seems like all those doubters were right. And he said to me, send me your resume. Now, mind you, this kid was like 24. I was 23 at the time, or 25, and I was 24. So not in a place of power by any means. The next day, I wake up, probably a little bit hungover from the birthday party, and I wake up to a text message that said, hey, man, I never got your resume. And I'm like, oh, my God. Like, what is this? This kid's 25. How much does he actually care about helping me out? And what can he actually do to help me out? So I send him my resume. I follow up a couple weeks later. I get a call from the hiring manager. And the hiring manager says he wants to bring me in for an interview. And I say, great. I get the job description. The job description was for a role in the middle office managing the exotic interest rate derivatives desk. Now, that was like a foreign language to me. I had no idea what that actually meant. And I looked at the job description. I couldn't have been further from qualified from it. But I replied to the manager. I took the interview. I called my friend Mike up, and I said, Mike, just teach me whatever you got to teach me. I just got to manage to get through this interview.
Yeah.
And he taught me, and I got to the interview, and fortunately for me, I could tell in the interview the hiring manager was a super smart guy, really nice, but also a little bit more reserved. So I figured if I can just kind of try to dominate the conversation, then maybe I have a chance. And that's what happened. And then I got into JP Morgan. Now, mind you, I'm 3 years out of college. I had been working for smaller firms before that. Now I'm walking into the biggest investment bank in the country, and I realized that I have not a single clue what I'm doing. I had no idea.
Yeah, talk about being in foreign waters.
What was going on, and I was so scared of being exposed. I mean, there were Bloomberg terminals all over the place. The traders over there, you could tell they were doing math that I would never be able to keep up with. Some of them had physics backgrounds, engineering backgrounds. I felt like it was just a matter of time before somebody found out that I had no idea what was going on. So I stayed quiet for the first couple of months there and just tried to soak in as much as possible. And it was in that time period that I realized the folks around me, as smart as they were, the one area that they lacked had nothing to do with the actual technical aspect of the job. It was merely communication. You know, I saw that there were gaps when it came to communication with each other, gaps when it came to communication with management, and gaps in simplifying a very complicated subject where exotic interest rate derivatives, as fancy and technical as that sounds, there are ways to simplify it so that, you know, the average person can have a conversation around it. So I really honed in on kind of that aspect of things. And when it came time where I was up to move up to a next level in my career, I had basically positioned the fact that, you know, if I can communicate effectively around a very complicated topic, there's no reason for me to be sitting behind computer screens, and I should be put in front of clients. Yeah. And that was my positioning, and that's how I moved into my next, you know, my front office role at that point into JP Morgan. And I spent the next 3.5 years at that point working with clients and presenting to clients and managing client relationships. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you put in your dues. Like, you did what you had to. You had that sacrifice to be put in a better position to do something you actually wanted to.
It involves sacrifice, but I think the important part was the acknowledgement that I had no idea what I was doing, but I had to pivot. I had to get strategic again, you know, before I really did get exposed. And that was honing in on something like my communication skills and my effective ability to simplify a complex subject, because that was the only way that I was going to differentiate myself.
Yeah, the one constant of life is the change. It's like we all have to be sort of chameleons and just change to our different scenarios and environments at times. So it seems like you do that in full in changing to the things that happen and just going with the flow of life. And sort of the next thing I really want to talk about, and the next big monumental achievement you had and thing you took on, is racing itself. So like all the knowledge, all the experience, the copious amounts of it that you built up, and then now applying it to running races, which is no hard thing. As someone who has ran races, I went through 5K to 10K to half marathon, and then you have a half Ironman coming up in September. You did all those things as well. So can you talk about taking on that new challenge and breaking that barrier within yourself to run those races?
Yeah, so I never lost the bug to prove myself athletically. It was something that was always deep within me, and maybe I didn't, it's not a matter of maybe, I didn't feel like I lived up to my potential in high school when it came to being an athlete. And then in college, most of my friends played collegiate sports and I did not. And so I felt a little bit left out in that perspective. And then after graduating, I was so focused on navigating myself into that seat at JP Morgan that I just could not keep up when it came to how much I wanted to work out. So once I was finally established at JP Morgan, I thought about different ways to take the next step and take on the next challenge. And I was seeking out something. I needed something to fulfill me besides my job. My job at that point, it was good. I was happy being at JP Morgan, but it wasn't fulfilling.
Yeah.
So I started spinning at a studio that was opened up by a group of my friends here in the city. It's called Swerve. It's a very it's fairly new now, a couple of years old, 4 or 5 years old, and it's a team-based spin studio. So it's a new concept that was introduced at that time, and the culture that was cultivated over there was very goal-focused. Because it was team-based and it was very oriented around working together, the idea of setting goals outside of work started to kind of click a little bit. So piece by piece, I started doing small things like running 5Ks and then 10Ks. And every time I ran 1 mile more than the last, I started to feel like, okay, like maybe
that progression.
I can do this. And I remember one year I had set out a goal to run a half marathon. And at that point, I didn't think it was going to happen. I thought, no, there's no way I could ever run 13 miles. It's crazy. And I did what a lot of people advise you to do when it comes to your goals. And at the time, I still wasn't really sure if it would work, but I wrote it down. I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard that, but I wrote down my goal, and I would stare at it every day on my fridge. And the goal was simply to run a half marathon. It was nothing revolutionary, but it still intimidated the heck out of me. That year, I had one instructor who she was a spin instructor, and she was really good, and she used to darken the room, and I used to take these classes at 6 a.m, and she used to repeat the phrase, I can, I am, I will. So a lot of words of affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
And I would take her class pretty religiously leading up to the half marathon, and I had only trained up to 10 miles, because at that point they tell you, don't try to overtrain, you might injure yourself, etc. And I got to race day. It was a nice September day, and I got to mile 10, and all of a sudden my legs buckled. And I don't know if you know this or if you've experienced this.
Definitely.
But when it comes to running, there's such a mental aspect to it that once you start to enter new territory, like mentally, like your body kind of is like, wait, we don't do 11 miles. We only ran 10 miles last time. So I had to re-engage myself through the last 3 miles, and I found myself repeating her words, I can, I am, I will, I can, I am, I will, until I made it to the finish line. And that was the first time where I made it to the finish line. I'm like, oh my God, like I wrote down this goal like a year ago. I stared it down every day. I kept telling myself positive messages, and it actually worked. And so from there, I was kind of like, okay, like maybe we're on to something. So I spent the next couple of years running a couple more races. I racked up, let's say, I don't know, somewhere in the range of, let's say, a dozen half marathons. And then that same group of people who I had been working out with at that spin studio started taking on triathlons. And they asked me if I'd be interested. And for me, swimming was never something that I was into. I'm not a good swimmer. You know,
it's my biggest fear as well.
For the sake of the book, it wasn't a barrier I was ever looking to break. I felt like I had my hands full at that point. But I have FOMO. I am a millennial. And I started doing these triathlons. And I did a sprint triathlon, and then that led to a couple Olympic triathlons. And eventually that same group of people said, hey, we're signing up for this half Ironman. And I paused because I'm like, all right, now you're getting a little ahead of yourself. I was telling myself, and I really hesitated. I was scared, to be honest. I didn't really feel like it was something that I could ever do. But for some reason, as scared as I was, I paid for the race. And I knew that once I paid for the race that I was going to compete, but it took me a while to accept it. This was around December of 2016. I told myself I'd make it through the holidays, and then once January came around, I was going to shut it down again, similar to how I did when I was seeking out that job at JP Morgan.
Mm-hmm.
So from January till May, I wouldn't go out, I wouldn't drink, I'd work out almost twice a day. I'd jump into that cold pool in early mornings in the winter.
Locked in.
And again, and people kept asking me throughout that time period, Bishoy, why are you doing this? And to be honest, I had no answer. I couldn't answer the question for them. I couldn't answer it for myself. I buckled, and I really didn't know why I was doing it, but deep down inside, I felt like I had to do it. So I was just moving like a robot. I was doing it. And I got to race day in June of 2017, and it was 93 degrees outside in Maryland. And you never really know if you're ready for a race like that. And what I tell people that ask me now when it comes to any sort of race is, race day is the easy part. The hard part is the training.
Oh, yeah.
Race day is the easy part. And so it took me a while to accept that. But it truly is the case. Like, enjoy race day. Whatever race you're doing, even if you think you're not prepared, you put in the work. Even if you didn't put in enough work, just enjoy race day.
You can't control it at that point.
You can't. So I get in the water that day, and it's a 1.2 mile swim, and it's half with the current, half against the current. And I had two rules for myself: don't stop and don't look back. If you stop, you're going to lose momentum. If you look back and you realize how far away you are, you're going to freak out. So I just wanted to keep on to those two rules, and I did. I got in the water. I made it out in about an hour and 6 or 7 minutes. Not spectacular time, but it was about average, and it was good enough, and I was thrilled. I was like, all right, hard part's over. I had 69 miles to go, but for some reason I thought the hard part was over. So I hop on the bike, and what happened was it was the same weekend as the New York City bike tour, and the bike company that I had rented a bike from sent me the wrong bike. They sent me a hybrid instead of a road bike. And for anybody listening that knows anything about biking, a hybrid, it's essentially like ordering like a BMW and getting a Corolla. And so it was 93 degrees outside, and I'm pounding away at this bike that's not moving for 56 miles. And I gave up on all hopes of any sort of time goal at that point, because I realized that wasn't going to happen, but I knew I wanted to make it to the finish line. The sun was pounding down. People were flying past me. At around mile 40, I looked down. There was salt all over my skin. I was completely dehydrated. There wasn't a single rider around me. And I had this moment where now I'm asking myself the same question that people had been asking me for the past 5 months. Bishoy, why are you doing this? Like, how the hell did you get yourself into this situation where here you are in the middle of nowhere, Maryland, 93 degrees outside, you're like, you look like death. And I remember I was turning 30 that year, and I had my phone in my compression shorts, and here I am, almost 30 years old, about to call my mother at the finish line and call it a day. But I knew I couldn't do that. So we touched on the whole theory, the whole idea of small goals and small wins. For the next 30 miles, I had to compartmentalize the race, and I had to break it down into small pieces. So for the rest of the bike ride, I had to break it down into 5-mile markers. And then when I got to the run, which was 13 miles, the only way I was going to finish that run in the heat of day at 12:30 was I had to break it down into running 1 mile 13 times. Yeah. I couldn't run 13 straight miles. So I had to basically give myself a pat on the back after finishing every single mile for those 13 miles. And once I made it across the finish line, that's when I had the real moment. And the moment wasn't, oh my God, you just finished that half Ironman. It was, Bishoy, you've been holding on to this story of breaking barriers for the last 30 years. It's about time you did something about it. And that's when I decided to run the New York City Marathon. And that's when I decided for the very first time that I was going to tell people about this mantra that I had been holding on to for my entire life. Wow.
I think I need a second to just comprehend all that. No, that's amazing. It truly is. The one thing I thought about was how much pain can bring presence. You know, because when you got to that last leg of your race, there was a lot of pain there, a lot of discomfort, but it caused you to focus on the little things, and through that, it caused you to be present. That is just literally everything. To be the most present whether it's a race, with your family, in your job, just any experience in life, to be present is just, that's like your catharsis moment that you got to unlock that is just, that's amazing to see. I couldn't imagine the feelings you felt and emotions you felt at the end.
Yeah, that you're absolutely correct. I mean, getting myself in a situation that uncomfortable had me zoned in like I've never been zoned in before. I mean, I have literally obviously been in life or death situations as a child, but this felt like I was fighting for myself, like emotionally, spiritually. I was fighting to prove to myself that I belonged out there, and that for the last 5 months I had been training for something bigger than crossing a finish line. I had been training to prove to myself that this mantra is something worth sharing. And once I crossed that finish line, that's when it clicked that, okay, it's go time. Let's do it.
Yeah. So can you talk about, so you're literally at the point now of you're spreading your message, your mantra, everything you've been through. So what is it like? Just literally, what is it like to be able to do that now and reach that point through a lot of the sort of beautiful mud you had to go through in order to get there?
I can tell you with 100% certainty that if you had told me that I would have done any of the things that I had done over the last 2-3 years, if you told me that 5-10 years ago, I would have told you were absolutely out of your mind. So when I decided to finally share my story for the New York City Marathon, in order to run the marathon in 2017, you have to either get in through a lottery, which is very difficult, or raise money for charity. I decided to raise money for charity, and I chose the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society for no real reason. I didn't work with them as a child, but it just made sense given my diagnosis. And so I wrote down my story. I sat on it. I almost didn't share it because I had that moment of vulnerability of, what if I put it out there and no one buys in, right? Like, what if nobody donates and then all of a sudden I look pretty silly? Because this was literally everything I believed on paper. Like, if this was my life, this was my mantra, this was my story on paper, that if people didn't buy in, then I was going to look really foolish. And so I sat on it, and then I showed it to a mentor at JP Morgan, someone who I had only been working with professionally at the time. And I said to him, I trusted him, and I said, "Hey, Tim, what do you think about this?" And he looked at it and he laughed, and he goes, "You need to make that goal a little bit higher. My goal is just $3,000, which was the minimum I had to fundraise." He goes, "You need to aim high." And he goes, "Here's your first donation. Go get it." And he gave me a pretty good donation at the time. Wow. And I was fired up. And what happened over the course of the next 3-4 months was the story took off. And $1,000 turned into 5, turned into 10, turned into 15, where all of a sudden I got an email from New York Roadrunner saying, "Hey, you've been selected to be one of the faces of the New York City Marathon." And then I got a call from NASDAQ saying, "Hey, we'd love to have you come ring the closing bell." And then ABC featured me during the broadcast, where for me, this had nothing to do with any of that. All I wanted to do was simply tell people that I'm a normal dude, and throughout life I had this mantra of breaking barriers and overcoming obstacles, and I just wanted to spread a message of positivity, and it was nothing more than that with intent. But I saw that it was extremely relatable, and and that's when it dawned on me that this might be bigger than just one race, and this might be bigger than just raising money one time, that maybe I can do more with this. So since the New York City Marathon in 2017, I have been involved in writing pieces for different articles. I wrote a piece for The Muse, which I was pretty proud of a year and a half ago, and that piece focuses on translating success, battling illness, to success in your career. I had been invited to speak at investment banks. I had been invited recently to go back and speak to my alma mater, SUNY Geneseo, and speak to their students. And in the back of my mind, I always kind of toyed with the idea of writing a book, but I don't know. I had no idea how to write a book. I mean, I'm not an author. There was nothing about me in my resume that suggested that I would ever write a book. And last year, I really, really zoned in on it for some reason. And I Googled how many words you need to write to hit 100 pages, just because I thought 100 pages was a respectable amount. So if people ask me, what did you know about writing a book? I knew nothing. I literally Googled how to write a book. And I started writing. And once I got to 20,000 words, I was like, oh my God, maybe I have a book. And it was literally just word vomit. It was basically whatever was on my mind, I put down on a Word document. And I reached out to a friend who was pretty connected, and I said, hey, can you connect me with one of your author buddies? He connected me with his friend that's an author, who then gave me his editor. And his editor was a miracle worker, and he became my editor now, where he helped me change that 100 pages into 200 pages. And the way he did that was he made me do different exercises. One of the exercises, which I'll never forget because it challenged me more than anything else throughout this process, he told me to think about the 40 most critical moments of my lifetime and to write 1,000 words for each of those moments.
Wow.
This was after I thought I wrote the book. Like, I thought I already finished the book. and now this dude's telling me to write 40,000 new words. And he helped turn that Word document of word vomit into a story that takes the reader through a journey, brings you there with me, paints a picture, puts you in the room, which is, it's crazy. I literally just got the first edit of the cover today. So we are we're in
really close.
Yeah.
Really close. That's amazing. Congratulations just on that. The one thing I want to mention is we talked about focusing on the little things, celebrating the small wins, but then when you talked about your race, raising money you did, it sort of went outside yourself. So it's critical to have like a goal that's bigger than just yourself, but then focusing on the micro things. It's such a fine balance to be able to juggle both. And it played out so well to show like all the other avenues of opportunities that came your way because of it. You did a really excellent job with that. It's a great example for people to follow. Yeah, blueprint.
Yeah, one of the things that I really, really try to focus on with regards to fundraising and telling a story. So, like, for instance, I'm running the marathon again this year, and I'm centering a lot of my mission around the release of the book, but I'm putting I'm leading a $100,000 campaign for the marathon this year. And when people ask me about the message that I'm trying to get across or what my focus is, I don't try to focus on the biographical stuff. So I don't try to focus on the fact that as a child I had cancer and that I moved, and because that those stories exist all over the place. There's nothing really too special about that. But what I try to focus on is the fact that if I can do it, so can anybody else, because I was not given any more in terms of a gift than anybody else. I have my experiences, which maybe for me I consider to be a blessing, but I wrote the book to help other people channel that mindset to overcome their own obstacles, whether they be personal, professional, athletic, whatever it may be. Yeah.
And so talking about books, besides the question I was going to ask is, what is one book you wish you read when you were younger? Obviously, it would be, if it was out, Breaking Barriers, or Break Barriers, your book. But what would be one book that you would go back to or read when you were younger, just to maybe get a little sort of fast forward to your learning process and like expedite that process?
Yeah, so there's a few books. I like the Simon Sinek books. I like Leaders Eat Last. I like Start With Why. I recently read David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me, which I do relate to several aspects. He talks about how he had an accountability mirror, similar to how I wrote down that goal, and it stared at me every day. And so those are a couple books that I would kind of lean in on. But when I think about the Simon Sinek books in particular, I love the fact that it really hones in on the ideas of the idea of purpose and seeking out that purpose, and looking for that fulfillment and understanding, like we said, that it involves making uncomfortable decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. And then one thing to talk about, since do you lead people at your current job? I'm sure you do some type of leading, or maybe do you or no?
No. So I'm not in a managerial position at my current job. So
Because I was,
like I said earlier,
yeah, no,
I just joined at Salesforce here, so I work in a sales and relationship management role. I'm an account executive over there. So my job is just to face off against clients.
okay,
because my day job.
Because the question I was going to ask is, when sort of leading people, because I know Simon Sinek talks about this as like leading yourself first, and like everything you went through, I mean, you have to start with the inward rewiring and belief before you can do it outwards. So would you say or agree with the fact of like before you can lead anything or do anything or have a goal outside of yourself, you first have to believe it in yourself first and lead yourself within?
Absolutely. Absolutely, because it all starts with you. So for instance, when I think about my personal story, if I didn't go through all that, like if I didn't get to that finish line at that half Ironman and force myself to battle through the demons of not just the physical demons of training, but like the constant, like, no, Bishoy, you can actually, like the self-doubt, the lack of confidence, the flashbacks to getting cut from teams over and over again, the flashbacks to being told you'll never be as fast as those other guys, the flashbacks to just coming home in tears because when I finally made a team, I felt like nobody believed in me. Like, you had to go through that. And so I think that absolutely I agree with that sentiment of as a leader, you need to experience it before you put yourself or before you instruct others. You need to like put yourself in their shoes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because one of our main mantras, talking about mantras, I know you have your own with patience, purpose, and perspective. Ours is improve yourself, impact lives. So you improve yourself. Not only you improve other facets of your life, but you impact other people. And you are literally, just to hone in on what you're doing, you are living that out yourself. So that's why it resonates so much with what you're doing and with the way in which you're handling yourself and just impacting the amount of people you are. It's amazing to see from the outskirts looking in. And just one of the last things I want to talk about is I like to ask a sort of stapled in question within the episode. You have a lot of goals. You have a lot of things you're conquering. But what is one monumental goal that you want to lead yourself to achieve within your lifetime?
Wow. I want to one day raise my kids to succeed way further than I ever will. I would say that would be the most important lifetime goal for me. That's my down the road goal. I don't have kids. I'm not married, but you know, if I think about what I want out of a lifetime, is I want to one day have kids that are beyond any success that I can ever cultivate for myself. And then in terms of a short-term goal, I want to hit that $100,000 this year for the marathon.
Yeah. And I'll make sure we'll have all the links for that in the description. Yeah.
I could send you everything. If you go on my website, www.bishoytadros.com, the donate link will be on top there. And certainly encourage folks to follow me on all forms of social. And
just to end on this point, what is the meter of where you're at with the race and the fundraising and your progress with that?
Yeah, so far to date, we've raised a little over $10,000. Now, a portion of proceeds from book sales are going to go to the fundraising. There will be an event around the book launch that is being scheduled right now that is anticipated to bring in a good amount. And I can't go into too much detail yet, but I have a very special person who agreed to write the foreword for the book. And my plan is to hopefully work with his team to potentially get some press opportunities around the book release.
Wow, I'm at the edge of my seat. I know we're not in person, but I'm at the edge of my seat. I cannot wait. Wait for that.
So stay tuned. We are. I do believe that the book should be published within the next 30 days. So we are right there at the finish line.
Wow, that is fabulous. And just to sort of wrap in full, I really want to just say the value you bring to this world and to this episode and to even myself, and coming to realizing your story, thanks to, Mark. He introduced me to you, and then when I came across everything, it's just amazing. But to talk to you and see everything you're doing and going through, and the way you tell your story is truly fascinating. So just thank you so much for your goals, yourself, you're improving yourself in full, everything you're doing.
Thank you, Anthony. I really appreciate the platform, the opportunity. This is, I'm grateful to anyone who can give me the time to share. And my thing is always, if there's just one person that takes something away from it, then it was all worth it. And that's what I think about when it comes to these things.
Yeah.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.